My son hadn't been able to stand on his own for 5 years. And then, just 11 minutes after his wife drove away, the impossible happened. A loud crash echoed from the hallway. I ran toward the sound, and froze. My son was standing. Both hands were pressed against the wall, his entire body trembling, his legs shaking so violently they looked ready to collapse beneath him. He slowly lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were clearer than I had seen in years. Then, in a hoarse whisper, he said, "Dad, we don't have much time. We have to leave before the medication wears off." The coffee cup slipped from my hand. It shattered across the tile floor. Neither of us looked down, because in that instant, I realized a horrifying truth. For the past 5 years, maybe my son had never truly been paralyzed at all. My name is Stanislaw Mazurek. Everybody's called me Stan since kindergarten. I'm 68 and I live in Peoria, Illinois, up on the bluff, and I have lived within 9 miles of the Illinois River my entire life. I was a hospital pharmacist for 34 years, inpatient, then clinical, the last 11 of it as the pharmacist who sat in on rounds. Now, people hear pharmacist and picture somebody counting out 30 tablets behind a counter at a drugstore. That is not what I did. What I did was interactions. A patient comes up from the ER on 4 medications. Cardiology adds 1. Somebody's primary added 1 2 years ago that nobody's looked at since. And every single one of those, taken by itself, is completely appropriate. Every one of them has a reason. Every one of them would pass an audit line by line. And together they'll kill him. That's the job. The job is that nothing on the list is wrong and the list is wrong. We've got a phrase we all learn in the first year, and it's about 500 years old, and it goes, "The dose makes the poison." Meaning there is no such thing as a safe substance or a dangerous one. There is only how much, for how long, and next to what. 34 years of that. 20,000 medication lists, easy. And I have never once in my life had a physician be annoyed with me for calling and asking a question, because that was my entire job and I was good at it. Hold on to all of that. It is going to come back and take a bite out of me. My wife was Bernadette. 40 years. She died in 2016 before any of the rest of this ovarian, and it was 11 months from the first appointment to the last one. And I want to say something about that because it's part of why I was available for what came next. After she died, I retired within a year, because the house on the bluff had gotten to where I would stand in the kitchen at 8 at night and not be able to think of one reason to go into any other room. My son is Bram. He's 41 now. He's a journeyman iron worker. Was. Local out of here bridge work, grain elevators, the tank farms down along the river. He was a steward for 6 years, which means when there was a problem between a crew and a contractor, 20 men would go get Bram. He's a big man, 6'3". And he had that thing where he didn't have to raise his voice, and I never had it, and I don't know where he got it. His mother, probably. The accident was in April, 5.5 years ago. County road out past Hannah City. A grain truck came through a stop sign and caught the driver's side of Bram's pickup doing about 50. They got him out and flew him to the trauma center in Peoria. And here is the sentence that this entire story rests on, and I heard it with my own ears at 3 in the morning in a hallway on the 4th floor. The trauma surgeon told us the cord was compressed. Not severed. Compressed. And he used the word incomplete. And then he used the word temporary. He said with aggressive rehab, 12 to 18 months, he'd expect significant motor recovery. I heard that. I was standing right there. I have 34 years of hearing physicians say things, and I know exactly what I heard. That was the last time anybody used the word temporary about my son. Bram's wife is Danika. She's 39. She's a regional director for a home health agency. She was, anyway. 15 years in that world. Staffing, care plans, agency accreditation, durable medical equipment, the whole apparatus. Which means she knew every single person and every single form in a 200-mile radius. And within 72 hours of that accident, she had taken control of every part of it. She had a specialist flown down from Chicago, a man named Anton Verhoeven, quiet, soft handshake, and a business card with 3 board certifications on it. He looked at the imaging. He talked to Danika in a hallway for about 20 minutes while I sat in a family waiting room with a vending machine coffee. And then he came in and sat down across from me with what I can only describe as genuine-looking sorrow on his face, and told me the initial read had been optimistic. that there was permanent damage at the level of the injury, that my son would not walk again, and I believed him. I want to stop right here, because I know what some of you are already thinking, and you're right, and I'd rather say it before you do. I was a clinical pharmacist for 34 years. I sat in rounds. I have questioned attendings. I once got a chief of surgery to reverse an order at 2 in the morning, and a man I had never met contradicted a trauma surgeon in front of me, and I sat in a plastic chair and said okay, because I was 59 days out from burying my wife, and 11 hours out from being told my son was in a truck that got hit by a grain hauler, and I did not have one thing left in me. Not one. That's the honest answer. There isn't a better one. I moved into their house on Sheridan that same month, and what my life became for the next 5 years was this: up at 6, get Bram up, get him into the chair, get him into the bathroom, get him back out, and then Danika would make his breakfast. She did it every single morning. She was never once late, and she never once complained where anyone could hear it. She'd grind his morning medications into a glass of orange juice because he had trouble with the pills early on, and she'd stir it with a long spoon and hand it to him, and put her hand on the back of his neck and say something soft. Every morning for 5 years. 1,847 mornings. I have counted since. I did the arithmetic one night after all this, and then I wished I hadn't. He'd be dull by 9, gone by noon, asleep before 8 most nights. And I thought that was the injury. I thought it was the grief. I thought that's what happens to a man who was 6 to 3 and could quiet a crew with a look when his world shrinks down to the width of a doorway. Now here's the part I have to tell you, and I'd rather not. In year 2, I asked. One morning I was standing at that counter while she was grinding, and I said, "What's in the mix now?" And she said the name of a compound. Just said it, easy, no hesitation, while she was stirring. And it was real. It's a real thing. It exists. It's prescribed. And it does more or less what she said it did. I looked it up that afternoon on my phone in the garage like a man checking a receipt, and it came back exactly the way she'd described it. And I felt ashamed of myself for asking. That's what I want you to hear. I felt ashamed. Like I'd insulted a woman who was getting up at 6 in the morning to take care of my son. So I never asked again. Not in 3 more years. And this is the thing that has taken me 1.5 years to be able to say out loud, I asked the wrong question. I asked what's in it. That's the question a layman asks. I spent 34 years teaching residents not to ask that question. The right question, the one I asked 20,000 times for strangers and never once for my own son, is, let me see the whole list. Because nothing on that list was wrong. That's how it worked. Every single item on it had a name and a reason and a prescriber. Any one of them would have passed an audit. It was the list. If you've ever accepted an explanation, because pushing on it would have made you feel small because the other person was doing something hard, and you didn't want to seem ungrateful, then you already know exactly why. I stopped asking. And I need you to hear that it is not a character flaw. It's the most human thing there is. It is also the exact mechanism. In October, Danika went to Denver for 8 days, an accreditation training for her agency. She had her bags by the door 2 days early, 2 of them matching gray with little tags on the handles. And when she pulled out of that driveway on a Tuesday morning, I felt something I had not felt in 5 years, and it took me a minute to identify it. Quiet. Not the quiet of an empty house. The other kind. The kind where a pressure you'd stop noticing comes off your chest and you take a breath and go, oh, I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the leaves piling up against the fence. And I was thinking about maybe getting Bram out onto the back deck for an hour, because it was one of those October days we get here where the river fog burns off by 9 and the light comes in sideways. 11 minutes after her car turned the corner, I heard something hit the hallway wall. Not the chair. I know the chair. 5 years, I know exactly what that chair sounds like on hardwood. This was a shoulder, and then a sharp intake of breath, and then something heavy enough that the picture frames moved. I came around that corner and stopped so hard my socks slid. My son was standing, both palms flat on the wall, arms locked and shaking, his legs bent at the knee and trembling like something under a load it was not rated for. The legs I had lifted and positioned and strapped into footrests every single morning for 5 years. He was breathing like a man who'd come up from underwater. I said his name, and I don't know if any sound came out of me. He turned his head. His face was gray and wet, and his eyes His eyes were clear. 5 years. 5 years of that soft, drifting look, and I had built an entire understanding of my son around that look, and it was gone, and what was underneath it was sharp and frightened, and completely, entirely there. He said, "Dad, we have to be gone before it wears off." And I did not ask what it was. I want to be honest about that too, because it says something about what I already knew underneath everything I was telling myself. I did not say, "What do you mean?" I did not say how. I crossed 4 steps of hallway and got my shoulder under his arm. He was heavier than I remembered, or I'm older. Both, probably. We went down that hall in about 3 minutes, and it felt like fording a river. I got him in my truck. He fell against the passenger window with his chest going. And I did not start the engine. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and looked at the side of my son's face and asked him, as carefully as I have ever asked anybody anything, to tell me what was happening. He talked for 40 minutes. I did not interrupt him one time. Here's what he told me. The accident was real. The compression was real. The trauma surgeon's read was also real, and it was correct, and 12 to 18 months of hard rehab was all it was ever going to take. Danika knew that before Verhoeven ever got on a plane, because she'd been in contact with him for about a month before the accident. Not about Bram, about something else, some agency thing, some referral arrangement. Bram found that out about 2 years ago, by accident. A shared folder that synced to a tablet they both used, and he opened it looking for something else. He saw emails. He saw dates that would not line up. He saw a company name he didn't recognize, and then he saw his own name in a subject line from an insurance broker he had never heard of. And he said nothing. I asked him why, and he looked out the windshield at the pines, and he said, "Because I wasn't sure any of it was real, Dad." He said there were whole weeks he could not have told you what day it was. He said he'd have a clear hour and then lose the rest of the afternoon. He said he genuinely believed for about 6 months that he was losing his mind, and that he could not tell the difference between something he'd seen and something he'd dreamed. And that is the actual crime here, not the money. That. She didn't just take his legs, she took his ability to trust his own eyes, which meant that when he finally saw the thing, he could not act on it because he no longer believed himself. 19 days before that October morning, he started holding the morning dose under his tongue and spitting it into the bathroom drain after she left the room. 19 days. He said the fog came off in layers. He said the first thing that came back was being able to follow a conversation on television, and he sat there and cried about it. And at night, after she was asleep, he'd get himself out of the bed and onto the floor and force weight through his legs. An inch. Then 6. Then, 4 nights before the end, a full stand against the bedroom wall in the dark, shaking so hard his teeth were going. 5 years of enforced stillness had taken almost everything he had. He was rebuilding it in a dark bedroom at 2 in the morning while the person who did it to him slept 8 feet away. He'd been waiting for a day she'd be gone long enough. I sat in that truck, and I gripped that wheel until the leather went. And the thing I felt was not the hot kind of anger. It was the other kind. The slow, structural kind. The kind that comes up through the floor of a man and changes what he's going to do for the rest of his life. I asked him where he needed to go. He told me to drive to a storage place out on Farmington Road. Unit 119. He said Danika kept a key on a ring in her coat pocket. And he said that about 4 months earlier, during one of the clear hours the tapering had started giving him, he had taken that ring while she was at the store and driven no. He couldn't drive. He said he had gotten himself into the garage and used the key cutter Bram's father-in-law had left in there years ago and made a copy and put the ring back. That took him 50 minutes to do, he said, 50 minutes to move about 30 feet and back. We drove out there without talking. The unit was a 10 by 15 with a roll door and 1 bulb. When I got it up, the first thing in the light was file boxes. 9 of them in 2 rows, each one labeled in her handwriting, which I had seen on a refrigerator for 5 years. Behind them was a safe about the size of a dorm refrigerator. Bram knew the combination. He'd watched her open it once, in the garage, before it went out there, back when nobody thought he was paying attention. I want to slow all the way down here. Inside that safe were 3 things, and they took my understanding of the previous 5 years and turned it completely inside out. The first was the settlement. There'd been a civil suit against the trucking company. It resolved. $6,400,000. Danika told this entire family told me, at that kitchen table, with tears in her eyes, that it was in a protected special needs trust, locked up. managed by a firm downtown. Invested conservatively, so it would fund Bram's care for the rest of his life. She showed us paperwork. I held it in my hands. There was no trust. The money had gone through 3 companies. She formed in 3 different states over about 2 years, and what was left of it was sitting in an account with her name on it, and nobody else's. The rest was in the boxes. 2 rental properties down in Florida, a commercial building on Knoxville, a 35% position in a home infusion company operating out of Bloomington. She built a portfolio with my son's settlement while I changed his sheets. I stood in that storage unit and had to put my hand on the safe. The second thing was the insurance. 2 life policies on Bram, different brokers, different years, and her as sole beneficiary on both, $4,100,000 combined, and a third policy that was not life insurance. It was a disability product with a rider on it that pays a lump sum on a qualifying terminal diagnosis. And the third thing, clipped to the front of that third policy with a black binder clip was one printed email from Verhoeven, sent 6 days before she left for Denver. It said his side was ready. It said the documentation would be finalized on her confirmation. It gave a diagnosis, a progressive neurological deterioration consistent with long-term cord compression, described as untreatable. And it gave an expected timeline, 6 to 8 weeks. And then it said, "Let me know when you want to start." I read that 4 times. Then I set it down on top of the safe and looked at my son, who was sitting in an old camp chair I keep in the truck bed with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the concrete. I said, "She's not at a training." And he said, "No, she's not." And neither one of us said anything else for about a minute. I have never heard silence that loud in my life. Now my first instinct, the one that came before any thought at all, was to drive to the Peoria Police Department and put every one of those documents on a desk. That's what a reasonable man does. That's what a man who believes in the system does, and I am that man. I have always been that man. And I sat in that storage unit and made myself think it through the way I used to think through a case in rounds, and I understood inside about 4 minutes that it would not work. Here's why, and I want to lay it out, because this is the part that made me sick. Danika held his medical power of attorney. She had for 5 years. Everything in his chart went through her. She would produce Verhoeven, board certified, 3 states, 22 years, no history. And she would produce a story, and it would be a good one. The story is, a grieving, isolated 70-year-old man, a retired pharmacist, which sounds like exactly the sort of person who'd construct a medical conspiracy theory who could not accept his son's decline, and who has now dragged that son off his medication and out of his home. And the story would be, a patient with 5 years of documented severe neurological impairment is suddenly ambulatory and making accusations that his own records flatly contradict. Do you understand what that looks like from the outside? It looks exactly like what she designed it to look like. Every single piece of paper in this county said she was right, and we were the problem. We didn't need documents. We needed her doing it. We drove home, and I spent about 4 hours on the house. I had 2 small cameras. I'd bought them years ago, after some packages went missing off the porch, and I never got around to putting up the second one. I put one on top of the cabinet over the refrigerator, angled down at the counter where she prepared his medications every morning of her life. I put the second one in the hallway, in a smoke detector housing, looking into the living room and covering the front door. And I ran both of them off my phone's hotspot, not the house internet, uploading to an account that had nothing to do with anything in that building. If she pulled the router or shut the power at the box, they would keep going. Then I sat down with Bram, and we worked out exactly what the next few days looked like, the way I used to brief a shift. He would be in the chair when she came in. He would take whatever she gave him and not swallow it. He would look the way she expected him to look. And I would be exactly what I had been for 5 years, a tired old man in a chair with a book, unremarkable, no threat to anybody. That last part is the one I want to talk about, because I did not expect what it cost. For 5 years, that woman had looked straight through me. And it had hurt. In a low background way I'd stopped noticing, the way you stop noticing a noise. And now I had to go be that man on purpose. I had to perform being dismissed. If you have ever been underestimated so consistently that you started to wear it like a coat and then had to put that coat back on deliberately, knowing what you knew you understand. It is the strangest feeling I've ever had. It was like watching myself from the doorway. We had 6 days before she was due back. She came back in 4. Thursday night, 11:20. The front door opened and she came in with the gray bags, in the same jacket she'd left in. And here's what she did before she set the luggage down. Before she said one word to either of us. She looked at the kitchen counter. At his organizer. Her eyes went there before they went to her husband and before they went to me. 34 years of watching people, and I'll tell you, what a person looks at first tells you what they've been thinking about the whole way home. Then she turned around with a big smile and said the training had gotten cut short. Reorganization at the agency. She was sorry she hadn't called. She did not look disappointed. She looked rested. She had color in her face. She looked like a woman who had finished something, not a woman who'd been sent home early. I smiled at her and said we were glad she was back. And she crossed the room to Bram's chair and put her hand on the back of his neck and said something to him too soft for me to catch. And my son sat there with his chin down and his eyes half-lidded and gave her exactly the face she had spent 5 years manufacturing. I don't know how he did it. I have thought about it a lot. I could not have done it. That night I lay in the guest room with one earbud in, listening to the hallway feed. At 12:40 the morning, she made a call. Not from her phone, from a second one. Small, cheap, the kind you buy at a gas station. She kept her voice down, but that house is 50 years old, and the vents carry. She said she was back early. She said everything was in position. She said she needed the paperwork ready no later than Monday. And then she said, "Let's just get it done. I've waited long enough." I lay in the dark with that sentence sitting on my chest like a hand. At 4 a.m. I got up, put my boots on, and drove downtown to the federal building, and I sat in the parking lot until the lights came on. The FBI keeps a resident agency here, out of the Springfield office. I'd worked with agents twice in my career on prescription diversion at the hospital, which is how I knew the building existed at all. The agent who came down was a woman about 35 named Nita Okwosa, with exactly the manner of a person who has heard a great many walk-in tips that came to nothing. I put my phone on her desk and pulled up the photographs from the storage unit. Then the policies. Then the Verhoeven email. Then the audio from 4 hours earlier. She listened to that recording twice. Then she picked up her desk phone and called her supervisor at home. What followed was 2 hours in a room with no windows and 3 people, and a legal pad, and I laid out every piece of it: the settlement, the companies, the properties, the policies, the prognosis, the email, the phone call. They were not dismissive, not for 1 second. They were building something. Her supervisor was a heavyset man named Halloran, and about 90 minutes in, he told me something that reframed the whole thing. He said they'd had a file open for about a year on a set of medical professionals in 3 states facilitating insurance claims through manufactured diagnoses. He said they had financial patterns, and they had some deaths that looked wrong. What they had never gotten was a recorded communication between the medical side and the beneficiary establishing intent in advance. I had just handed him one, but it wasn't enough, and he told me so straight. He said a competent defense attorney takes "let's get it done" and I've waited long enough and turns them into a woman impatient about paperwork. She never said a word that means what we all know it means. And then he looked at me with the flat expression of a man who is about to ask something unreasonable and knows it. He told me I had to go back in that house. He told me they'd have people on both ends of the street, and a team staged 4 blocks out, and a medical unit at the fire station on Knoxville. He said the cameras would be monitored live. And he said I could not act. Not when she went to the pantry. Not when she came into the room. Not until they came through that door. He said, "Mr. Mazurek, we need her to take the step. If you move early, all we've got is a woman who is going to give her husband his evening medication. I am 68 years old. I have stood in a room and watched a resident push something that I had already flagged twice and had to physically get between him and the pump. That was the hardest thing anybody has ever asked me to do in my life, and it isn't close. I drove home in the gray part of the morning, and I sat in that driveway for a long time before I went in. Then I took my boots off in the mudroom the way I have every day for 5 years, and went and lay down on the guest bed, and looked at the ceiling until it got light. The next day and a half went the way time goes right before something you can't take back. She moved through that house with a specific energy, efficient, cheerful at the right moments and quiet at others. She made his meals. She adjusted him in the chair. She asked me about the Pinnacle group I go to on Wednesdays and whether Ed's hip had gotten any better. And I answered her. I passed her the paper. I poured her coffee. I stood in my son's kitchen and made small talk with a woman I had watched, on video, planned the timeline of his death, and I did it for 31 hours. Now here's the last part, and I'm going to slow it down all the way, because it took about 6 minutes, and I have not gotten 1 second of it out of my head. Saturday evening, about 7:45, the television was on. Some cooking competition. I was in the armchair with a paperback I had been holding open at the same 2 pages for an hour. Bram was in the chair by the window with his chin down. Danika went into the pantry and came back out with a small zippered case, dark blue, that I had never seen in that house. She set it on the counter and unzipped it with her back half turned to me. And I kept my eyes on the television, and in the edge of my vision I watched her working with something small in her hands. Not the organizer, not a glass. And I want to tell you what was happening in my chest, because I have never been able to describe it properly to anybody who wasn't there. My hands went cold, actually cold, the way they do outside in February, and there was a sound in my ears that I recognized clinically as my own blood pressure and could do absolutely nothing about. And every part of me that had spent 34 years standing between people and the wrong thing was screaming to get out of that chair. I gripped that paperback until I put creases in the cover that are still in it. I did not move. She came into the living room. Her voice went up into that soft, high register she used, the one I had heard 1,800 times through a wall. She called him sweetheart. She knelt down beside his chair. She put one hand on his forearm. On the port that had been placed 3 months earlier under a home health order, she wrote herself one more piece of the structure, put in quietly, months in advance, for exactly this. She said something about helping him sleep. She said he deserved to rest. And my son sat there with his chin down and let her. That's the part I still can't. He let her get that close. On purpose. Because we had agreed he would. I looked at the side of my son's face, and I could see one muscle going in his jaw, and I understood that Bram Mazarek, who had 30 years of being the biggest man in every room, was sitting perfectly still while his wife knelt beside him with her hand on his arm, because 2 federal agents had told him that was what it would take. And then the door came in. Not a knock. There was no announcement, just the whole mechanical concussion of a door being taken off its frame by people who do that for a living. The jam split. 3 came through in under 2 seconds. Lights, voices stacked over each other, everybody saying the same words. She went backward. Whatever was in her hand went onto the floor and under the coffee table. 2 of them had her arms before she got her balance. And she did not scream. That's the detail. She didn't make a sound. She tried for about 4 seconds to get her face into the right shape, the frightened wife, the confused caregiver. I watched her do it. I watched her try to load that expression the way you'd load a program. And then Agent Okwuosa came through that broken doorway with an evidence bag in her hand, and Danika's eyes went to the top of the refrigerator cabinet. Right to it. First look. She found that camera in about 1.5 seconds, and I watched her understand that it had been up there the entire time. And the performance just stopped, like a switch. She turned her head and looked at me, and what was on her face was not rage and it was not fear. It was contempt. The specific contempt of a professional who has been caught by an amateur and is mostly annoyed about the inconvenience. She never said one word to me. There was nothing left in her that would work on me, and she knew it before I did. They walked her out through my son's broken front door, and I got out of that chair and crossed the room to Bram, and he had both hands locked on the arms of that chair, and when I put my hand on his shoulder, he grabbed my wrist. Hard. The way a man grabs something when he's afraid of what he'll do if he lets go. I said, "She's gone." He nodded once. His jaw was locked. He was shaking. But he was there, completely there. My son, in a chair, on the other side of the worst 5 years of anybody's life. Verhoeven was arrested in Chicago inside 2 hours. 2 more people in that network went in before morning. The federal charges against Danika were attempted murder, wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and a set of financial counts I still don't fully follow. Her attorney filed what you'd expect. None of it went anywhere. Between the recordings, the documents in that unit, the physical evidence off the floor of that living room, and Verhoeven cooperating in the 3rd month, her defense was mostly ceremonial. Convicted on everything, 14 months later. 34 years, no early release. I sat in the 3rd row and watched them walk her out, and I want to tell you what I felt, because I've thought about it a lot. Nothing. Not relief. Not satisfaction. The clean, flat nothing of a thing being genuinely over. Bram's road back was not fast, and it was not inspiring most days, and I'm going to be honest about that, because I think you're owed the real version. 5 years of enforced stillness does damage that is separate from the injury. The muscle's the least of it. It's the joints, the bone density, the circulation, and the part of the brain that has forgotten how to send the signal. 3 months before he walked the length of the hallway without a hand on the wall. 7 months before stairs. He did not have some triumphant moment. What he had was 200 appointments and a therapist named Aurelio who did not let him quit and who he cursed at more than once. 14 months in, he went back out to the Union Hall, not to work. He can't do iron anymore and he's not going to. He went to sit in on a safety meeting because they asked him to. And about 40 men came in that room, and there was a thing that happened when they saw him standing at the back that he still cannot talk about without stopping. He does apprentice instruction now, 2 days a week. Classroom. He is very good at it. Now I said I'd tell you the hard part, and here it is. I need to say something about Danika, because I have had a long time to think about her, and I refuse to make this simpler than it is. That woman spent 15 years in home health. 15 years of watching what long-term care does to a family. Watching people liquidate a farm. Watching claims denied on a technicality by somebody who never met the patient. Watching decent people take 4 years to die while an entire industry build around them. Her own mother went through it. That's in the record. 6 years, and the family lost the house. And everything Danika believes about that system is accurate. That's the part that keeps me up. She isn't wrong about the world. She just decided somewhere in there that being right about the machine licensed her to run it backwards, on a man she had already privately reclassified from a husband into an expense. She wasn't a monster in her own head. She was the only person in the room unsentimental enough to do the arithmetic. I want you to understand that, because I think we all want these people to be obviously broken, and they are almost never obviously broken. They're usually the most competent person in the building. And here is my part, which I am not going to leave out. I was there. 1,847 mornings. I lifted him. I positioned him. Some mornings when she was on a call, I handed him the glass myself. I did not do it knowingly, and I did not do it out of anything but love, and I have talked to somebody about it for 1.5 years now, and I still cannot fully put it down. So here's what all of this taught me, and it is not the thing people expect from a man in my position. Everybody wants the lesson to be trust your gut, or watch out for the people you trust most. That's on 1,000 posts, and it has never once helped anybody, because a gut feeling can't compete with a board-certified specialist and a folder of paperwork. The real one is the pharmacy one. Nothing in that house was wrong on its own. Every medication had a name and a reason and a prescriber. The specialist was real. The credentials were real. The care plan was real. The IV port had a physician's order. Every individual item in 5 years of my son's life would have passed inspection, one at a time, all day long. The harm was never in an item. It was in the list. And I spent 34 years of my professional life being the one guy in the building whose entire job was to look at the whole list at once, and I never once did it for my own son, because doing it would have meant looking like I doubted the person carrying the weight. So here's the one thing I would ask you to actually do, and it is free, and it takes about 20 minutes, and I mean this more than anything else I've said tonight. If you have somebody in your family whose care is being handled by another person, a parent, a spouse, an adult child, anybody get the complete medication list, not from the caregiver. Call the pharmacy that fills it and ask for a printout of everything active. Then walk it into any pharmacy, hand it across the counter, and ask the pharmacist to do a full review. They will do it. It's a service. It's usually free. It takes them 15 minutes, and it is the single thing that would have ended this entire story in year 1. You are not accusing anybody of anything. You are doing the thing I did 20,000 times for strangers. And the question I sit with, most nights, still, who in my family do I only ever hear about through one other person, and when is the last time I heard from them directly, alone, with nobody else in the room? That's the isolation test. It's the whole tell. It was sitting right in front of me for 5 years. Now I want to hear from you, because people come down hard on this in both directions. Comment 1 if you think I did right building it, bringing in the federal side, and sitting in that chair. Comment 2 if you think I should have walked into the Peoria Police Department the day I opened that storage unit and taken my chances, because no evidence on earth is worth what those 31 hours cost my son. And comment 3 if you think the agents should never have asked either of us to do that, and I should have said no and gotten him out of that house that afternoon. Number 3 is the one I go back and forth on. If you've got something for me on it, I'll read it. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are right now. It's about 10 here, and there's fog off the river, and it still gets me that somebody's hearing an old pharmacist talk while they're eating breakfast on the other side of the world. And here's the one I really want. If you have ever accepted an explanation from somebody because pushing back would have made you look ungrateful, tell me. Tell me what it was, and whether you ever went back and asked the second question. Because I didn't. I asked once, in year 2, and I got a real answer to the wrong question, and I let 5 years go by. If this one reached you, stay with me and subscribe. It's an old man on the bluff with a microphone and a paperback with creases in the cover. There's another one coming. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Peoria to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.